Melissa Holloway was the perfect wife. David was the loving husband. Their 3 children, Emma, Tyler, and Grace, were the heart of their quiet Vermont home. But on Thanksgiving night, while the world slept, Melissa did something so unthinkable, so cold, that even seasoned detectives struggled to understand why. What secret did she uncover that turned a devoted mother into a silent killer before sunrise? David Holloway was everything a small-town man aspired to be. He was successful, respected, and well-liked. He had designed the house himself, boasting about its open layout and smart use of natural light. He had charm, intelligence, and a certain calmness that made others trust him. Melissa was known as the ideal wife and mother, soft-spoken, warm, always present at school events, always baking something from scratch. Their children were well-mannered and close to one another, especially Emma and Tyler, who despite being teenagers, still helped their little sister Grace with homework or bedtime stories. To neighbors, they were the model family. To friends, they were lucky. To strangers, they were enviable. And yet, none of them knew the cracks that had quietly formed behind closed doors. For months leading up to Thanksgiving, Melissa had been withdrawing. Not in an obvious way. Not enough for anyone to suspect something was wrong, but she had started spending more time alone, often staring out the kitchen window long after the dishes were done, or forgetting small things like turning off the stove or picking up groceries. When asked, she would laugh it off as forgetfulness or fatigue. Even David didn't press. But Melissa wasn't just tired, she was unraveling. It had begun with an innocent discovery, a box of old documents, tucked away in a dusty corner of the attic. She had found it while unpacking a few last things. Most of the boxes had been labeled holiday decor. Books, photos. This one wasn't. Inside were manila folders, loose papers and photos from years long past. She flipped through them casually at first, not expecting to find anything unusual, but a sealed brown envelope buried beneath the pile caught her eye. It had no label, just a date written in faded black ink. November. Curious, she opened it. What she found inside was strange. Copies of hospital forms, an old birth certificate, and a blurry black and white photograph of a young girl in a hospital bed, no older than 3. The name on the certificate was familiar, too familiar. It was hers, but with a different last name. A name she didn't recognize. At first, she thought it was a mistake, a clerical error. But the more she read, the more unsettled she became. Why was this in their house? Why had David never mentioned it? Was he even aware it existed? The photo of the girl haunted her. There was something about the eyes. They were hers. Same shape, same stare, but they looked distant, almost hollow. There was no warmth in them, just confusion. And maybe fear. The rest of the week passed slowly. Melissa couldn't stop thinking about the documents. She tried to ignore them, but her mind kept circling back. Questions began to multiply. Where had she come from? Who was she really? And why did she feel like a stranger in her own home all of a sudden? The closer Thanksgiving crept, the more her anxiety grew. She smiled when people looked. She hugged her children tightly and told them she loved them. But inside her head, a storm had begun, one that would only grow stronger, one that, before the holiday was over, would consume everything in its path. Melissa couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Every detail in that envelope had begun to claw at her mind like a parasite. It followed her from room to room, crept into her dreams, and made even the simplest moments feel surreal. She found herself watching her family from a distance, studying their faces, their habits, their words, as if they weren't really hers. She no longer felt connected. She felt like an imposter among them. She kept the envelope hidden in her closet, tucked behind a row of sweaters. Every night after the kids had gone to bed and David was asleep, she would take it out and reread everything under the dim glow of her bedside lamp. Over and over, the same birth certificate stared back at her, her name, her date of birth. But the last name didn't match her current one, or any she'd ever been told. The hospital listed wasn't in Vermont either, but in a rural town several states away. And then there was the social worker's signature on the transfer document. It looked hastily scribbled, as if someone had been trying to finish it in a hurry. Her memories of early childhood were vague at best. She remembered being in foster care briefly, but she had always believed that her life had started with adoption. She was told she had no surviving biological relatives. That story had always made sense. It had felt clean, safe. Now it felt like a lie. Melissa became obsessed with the date on the envelope. November 20. It was Thanksgiving Day 27 years ago. Why would someone save these documents and date them on that exact holiday? It couldn't be a coincidence. That was the first thread she began to tug on. She searched online, digging through public records and newspaper archives, trying to see if anything had happened on that day that might connect to her. But the results were sparse. There were reports of a fire in a foster facility near the same hospital. Several children were relocated. No names were listed. The trail went cold until she tried something different. She entered David's name into a national foster registry database, just on a hunch, and there it was, a record from 1995, placing him in a temporary group home in the same town, just miles from where her birth records had originated. Her chest tightened. He had never mentioned living there, never mentioned being in the system at all. She couldn't sleep that night. In the morning, David acted as if everything was fine. He kissed her on the cheek, thanked her for making coffee, and went off to his study to review blueprints. Melissa sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her cup. Her husband was hiding something. She knew it. But why? In the following days, she became more determined. She visited the local courthouse, pretending to research a genealogy project. The clerk, an elderly woman, helped her pull up microfilm records from the county David had grown up in. Melissa scanned page after page until she found it, a juvenile court case file, sealed due to privacy laws. The docket number matched the burned piece of paper that had been tucked inside the brown envelope. Her hands trembled. She wasn't sure what it meant yet, but she was now certain that her life and David's had been intertwined long before they ever met as adults. But how much did he know? The idea that he had known all along, that he had built an entire life with her while keeping something so dark, so twisted, made her physically ill. What terrified her more was the possibility that their children might carry the weight of that secret in their blood, a truth no one had ever intended to reveal. The questions were no longer about the past. They were about the present. The people she called family, the husband she had loved, the children she had raised, and the truth that now hovered like a shadow over everything. Melissa began to wonder, had she been living in a house full of lies her entire life? And if so, how far would she go to bury the truth once and for all? Melissa no longer recognized her own reflection. She moved through the house like a ghost, present but disconnected, haunted by the growing certainty that the life she had built was based on a secret she was never meant to uncover. Her children still laughed, still argued over who got the last slice of pie, still called her mom, with the innocence of those untouched by darkness. But to Melissa, every sound in the house echoed strangely, like she was hearing her family through a glass wall. She stopped sleeping. Each night she sat on the edge of the bed in silence, watching David breathe, wondering how much of their life he had fabricated. She became a quiet observer in her own home, analyzing his every movement, the way he touched her shoulder, the way he hummed while making coffee, the way he avoided looking directly at her whenever she brought up the past. Every act of kindness from him felt rehearsed. Every smile looked artificial. The DNA test was her last resort. She ordered a kit under a fake name, swabbed herself when no one was around, and later stole a used toothbrush from David's travel bag. She mailed both samples in a discreet envelope, not knowing what answer she truly wanted. A week passed, then another, and during that time her mind spun endlessly with possibilities. Maybe it was all just a mistake. Maybe he didn't know either. Maybe she was simply overreacting. But those small, desperate hopes were quietly drowned out by a voice that had grown louder with every passing day. The voice that told her this wasn't coincidence. that it was all connected, that something monstrous had been hiding in plain sight. The results arrived in the mail on a gray, windy afternoon. Melissa waited until she was alone to open them. She sat at the dining table, the same table where they had celebrated so many Thanksgivings, and unfolded the paper with shaking hands. Her breath left her in a sharp gasp, like she'd been punched in the chest. She read it again, and again. Each time, the words refused to change. The truth had been confirmed. They shared the same biological father. David, her husband, the father of her children, the man she had loved for nearly 20 years, was her half-brother. The room spun. Her body felt like it wasn't hers anymore. She couldn't scream. She couldn't cry. She sat frozen in her chair for what felt like hours. The house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. The sound reminded her that time was still moving, even though her world had stopped. Her thoughts turned to the children. Emma, who had David's sharp eyes. Tyler, who had her same nervous smile. Grace, so sweet and innocent. Were they wrong, tainted by something that should never have happened? Her stomach churned at the idea. Melissa tried to suppress the thoughts, but they came like a flood. Had David known this entire time? Had he chosen her, married her, had children with her, while hiding the truth? And if he had, what did that make him? And worse, what did that make her? The truth had poisoned everything. Melissa didn't know what she would do next, but she felt something shift inside her, something deep, irreversible. Her heart had once been full of love, but now it pulsed with betrayal, confusion, and a growing, inescapable darkness. And with Thanksgiving just days away, that darkness was preparing to rise. Thanksgiving morning arrived under a sky painted with pale gold and thin clouds drifting like whispers. Frost glazed the ground outside, clinging to fallen leaves and the edges of window panes. Inside the Holloway home, everything appeared normal. The scent of cinnamon and roasting turkey filled the air. A quiet jazz playlist hummed through the speakers in the living room. David was in the backyard sweeping the porch, while the children helped set the table under Melissa's careful guidance. But beneath her calm exterior, Melissa was unraveling. She had barely spoken since reading the DNA results. Her mind was no longer her own. It was a storm of questions, guilt, rage, and something else. Something darker. Every glance at David made her sick. She hadn't confronted him. Not directly. She wanted to, but every time she opened her mouth, the words caught in her throat like glass. She wasn't ready. Maybe she didn't want to hear his answer. Emma asked her that morning if Aunt Rachel was still coming for dinner. Melissa forced a smile and said no. They'd decided on a quiet family-only holiday this year. She hadn't told anyone. She had canceled the invitations, blocked the phone calls, and lied with ease. Because something inside her had changed. And once it changed, it didn't go back. As the hours passed, she moved about the kitchen with mechanical precision, peeling potatoes, basting the turkey, setting the silverware just so. David came in once, kissed her cheek, and told her how perfect everything looked. She smiled. He didn't notice that she didn't respond. The kids were excited, talking about movies to watch after dinner, board games to play. Grace made handprint turkeys and taped them to the fridge. Laughter still filled the rooms, but to Melissa it sounded distant, like an old recording playing in another house. She had begun preparing something else, something she didn't write down, something she didn't speak aloud, not even to herself. It lived only in her thoughts, slowly taking shape. She had started crushing pills from her old anxiety prescription. Dinner was served just before sundown. The table was glowing with candlelight, the food carefully arranged, steam rising from every dish. Melissa sat across from David, hands folded in her lap. She watched him take the first sip of wine and waited, not for a reaction. The effects wouldn't show for a while, but for the feeling inside her to change. For the disgust, the heartbreak, the betrayal to be replaced by something else. Relief, maybe, but it never came. As the others ate and laughed, Melissa barely touched her plate. Her eyes shifted from child to child. Emma, full of teenage confidence. Tyler, who still built Lego castles in secret. Grace, too young to understand anything about the world she'd been born into. Melissa wondered how they would remember this day, if they ever could. Would they understand why it had to happen? The sun dipped behind the hills, shadows stretched across the walls. Melissa knew the night would be long. And by morning, everything would be different. The final moments of daylight faded, leaving the Holloway home bathed in the warm flicker of candlelight and soft overhead bulbs. The Thanksgiving table was cleared, dishes stacked in the sink, and leftovers packed into neat glass containers. The children had retreated to their rooms, full and content, arguing gently over which movie to watch before bed. David, drowsy from the drug-laced wine, sat slouched on the living room couch, his head leaned back, mouth slightly open, eyes half-lidded with the sluggish heaviness that Melissa had anticipated. He mumbled something incoherent when she walked past him. She didn't stop, but that didn't mean she felt in control. Melissa stared at the tools for a long time, hoping, praying, even that something would stop her. A knock at the door, a phone call, a sudden shift in her own mind. But nothing came. The world outside remained silent, still, complicit. She returned to the living room first. David had slipped into a deep, sedated sleep. His breathing was shallow, uneven. He looked peaceful, vulnerable, completely unaware of the storm moving toward him. Melissa stood over him for nearly 10 minutes. She tried to summon emotion, grief, rage, love, anything. But all she felt was a hollow, echoing numbness. She covered his face with a blanket first. It was quick, quiet. When it was done, she stood there motionless, staring at the stillness she had created. He was gone, just like that. The man who had been her husband, her partner, her secret blood, her betrayal. One down. Upstairs, the hallway was dim. She moved barefoot, careful not to make a sound. Her body felt distant from her thoughts, as if she were watching herself from the ceiling, drifting in the thick silence of the house. Emma's door was first. Melissa turned the knob slowly and stepped inside. Her daughter was lying sideways on the bed, earphones in, phone resting on her chest. Her chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, lost in a peaceful teenage sleep. Melissa stepped closer, the knife gripped tightly in her hand. But then, she froze. Something inside her cracked. A memory flashed. Emma as a toddler, reaching up with sticky fingers, whispering, "Mama," like it was magic. Tyler's laugh as he tried to build a snow fort. Grace clinging to her on the first day of school. All three of them, her children, her pride, her joy. They were innocent. But they were born of something that should never have been. She stood over Emma for what felt like eternity. Her grip on the knife loosened. Her breath trembled. Her thoughts collided in chaos, a whirlwind of guilt, confusion, and unrelenting pain. And when she moved again, there was no hesitation. Every room was still, every bed undisturbed. The early hours of the morning wrapped the house in an unnatural silence. Outside, the frost thickened, clinging to window panes like a shroud. The world beyond the Holloway home was quiet, unaware of the horror that had just unfolded inside. Not a single light was on in the neighborhood. Inside, the stillness was suffocating. Melissa stood in the hallway, staring at nothing. Her hands, once trembling, now hung limp at her sides. Blood stained her nightgown, her arms, even her cheek, a smear she hadn't noticed. She felt neither horror nor relief, only numbness. Deep, paralyzing numbness. Around her, the house remained untouched, almost disturbingly calm. The toys in the corner, the framed family photos on the walls, the half-finished Thanksgiving drawings taped to the fridge, all of it still in place, as if waiting for a family that would never wait. The bodies lay exactly where she left them. David still on the couch, face partially covered by the blanket. Emma, curled under her comforter, one arm dangling off the side of the bed. Tyler, his light still on as if he had tried to finish a book before sleep claimed him. Grace, small and quiet in her pink pajamas, her favorite stuffed bear still clutched in one arm. None of them had moved, none of them had known. Melissa wandered from room to room, her footsteps soft, almost respectful. She paused to look at the photos on the hallway wall. All 5 of them at the beach. David lifting Grace into the air while Emma and Tyler laughed. Melissa herself smiling, frozen in a moment that no longer existed. A life that had seemed so perfect, so full of warmth and light, now smeared with irreversible darkness. The finality hadn't settled in. Her mind refused to process it. Somewhere deep inside, she kept expecting someone to sit up, to call her name, to ask what time breakfast was. But the silence pressed back like a heavy blanket, too real to ignore. There was no going back, no erasing what had been done. She moved to the bathroom and washed her hands. Slowly, methodically. The water turned pink, then red, then clear again. She scrubbed under her nails, watching the diluted blood swirl down the drain. Her reflection in the mirror was almost unrecognizable. Pale skin, hollow eyes, lips pressed tight into a bloodless line. She looked like someone else entirely. Someone who had done the unthinkable. She returned to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, next to David's still body. A television remote lay on the coffee table. She picked it up and turned on the TV, not even caring what channel it landed on. Static, then a cooking show, then the morning news. She left it there, the cheerful voices of anchors announcing weather updates and holiday headlines drifting into the air like some kind of cruel joke. Melissa didn't cry. She had cried in the days before, cried silently in closets, in the shower, in the attic when no one could hear her. But not anymore. Her tears were gone. Now there was only the heavy weight of silence and the steady ticking of the wall clock. The plan had ended here. She hadn't thought past the night. She didn't know what came next. Would she run? Would she lie? Would she confess? She didn't move. She didn't decide. She just sat in the house that had once been full of life, now transformed into a tomb of her own making. And outside the sky began to lighten. Another day had begun. The sky outside shifted from deep charcoal to a pale, icy gray as dawn crept over the hills. Cold light filtered through the frosted windows of the Holloway home, casting long shadows across the floor. Everything looked untouched, eerily perfect. The table was still set with Thanksgiving napkins. The children's school backpacks rested neatly by the front door. A pumpkin-scented candle still burned on the kitchen counter, its flame weak, flickering, about to die out. Melissa sat in the same spot she had been in for hours. Still silent, expressionless. Her eyes were locked on the television, though she wasn't watching. Her hands were folded in her lap, streaked with faint traces of blood she had missed. Her breathing was slow, shallow, mechanical. It was as if she had become part of the furniture, another still object in the lifeless home. At 6:42 a.m., she picked up the phone and dialed. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm. Too calm. "There's been a tragedy," she said. "My family, they're gone. I woke up and found them like this." The dispatcher's questions came quickly, but Melissa answered slowly, almost dreamlike. Her story was simple. She had gone to bed early, exhausted from cooking. She'd woken around dawn and discovered the bodies. There was no mention of the pills, the blanket over David's face, or the knife hidden beneath the laundry sink. She spoke like a grieving wife and mother, not a killer. Police arrived within minutes. The first officers on the scene entered cautiously, expecting the worst, but nothing could have prepared them for what they found. The children, all 3 of them, dead in their beds without any signs of struggle. David, motionless on the living room couch. Melissa sitting quietly in the armchair, still wearing her blood-stained nightgown, her eyes vacant. The officers spread out, checking rooms, radios, crackling with disbelief. They noted the absence of forced entry, no broken windows, no open doors, no sign of a struggle anywhere. Everything was in order, too in order. It didn't look like a crime scene. It looked like a family had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. Melissa was taken into custody for questioning, though she wasn't officially under arrest. The local news picked up the story within hours. Thanksgiving tragedy. Family of 5 found dead in Vermont home. Headlines spoke of a possible carbon monoxide leak. Others speculated on a home invasion. Photos of the smiling Holloways from social media were plastered across news sites. Images of birthdays, vacations, and school plays now turned into haunting reminders of what had been lost. But the police weren't convinced by Melissa's story. The autopsies revealed no trace of carbon monoxide, no blunt force trauma, no external injuries. But toxicology reports uncovered traces of powerful sedatives in David's blood. Far beyond therapeutic doses, the children's systems were clean, but the cause of death pointed to suffocation, smothered in their sleep. The evidence didn't align with an outside attacker. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no signs of struggle. The house had been locked from the inside. Nothing was missing. No valuables stolen. Suspicion turned inward. Detectives returned to the Holloway home with a warrant. They searched through drawers, closets, computers, storage bins. In Melissa's closet, hidden behind winter coats, they found the envelope. The same envelope marked November. Inside were the documents, the hospital record, the birth certificate, the court file fragments. But the most damning piece was the DNA report, confirming a biological link between Melissa and David. Next to it, they found a small notebook, pages filled with erratic handwriting, torn and stained. A journal of Melissa's descent into confusion, anger, and fear. Her questions, her theories, her pain. Her last entry read only one sentence: "They should have never been born." With that, the illusion of tragedy shattered. It was no longer a mystery. It was murder. The courtroom was silent, as Melissa Holloway entered in a plain gray jumpsuit, her wrists bound in cold metal cuffs. Cameras flashed, capturing her blank expression, as she was escorted to the defense table. The nation watched. The case had gone from a quiet family tragedy to one of the most disturbing crimes in recent memory. A mother who had slaughtered her entire family on Thanksgiving night. What haunted everyone most was not just the act itself, but the reason behind it. The trial began in early spring, 4 months after the murders. Prosecutors moved swiftly, laying out the evidence with chilling clarity. They displayed the timeline, the sedatives in David's system, the absence of any forced entry, the smothering of the children, the premeditation, the DNA report, the hidden journal. One by one, the pieces came together like an unthinkable puzzle. They described how Melissa had carefully staged the night, drugging her husband, waiting until everyone was asleep, then ending the lives of the people closest to her. But it was the motive that stunned the courtroom into silence. Experts testified about the psychological impact of the revelation Melissa had uncovered, the confirmed biological link between herself and her husband. Some described it as a textbook case of genetic sexual attraction, a rare psychological phenomenon that can occur when separated family members meet later in life without knowing their biological connection. Others argued that it was deeper than that, a complete mental breakdown brought on by the shattering of her personal identity. The defense painted her as a woman betrayed by her past, destroyed by a truth that should have never been hidden. They argued that Melissa had been adopted with sealed records, and that David's connection to her through the foster system was likely known to someone but Barry. She had lived a lie, unknowingly committing what she came to see as the ultimate taboo. Her marriage, her family, her entire life, suddenly corrupted by something she couldn't escape. But the prosecution reminded the jury that while grief could be felt, and confusion understood, murder was still murder. The children were innocent. David's awareness, or ignorance of their blood relation would never justify what happened. Melissa had made the choice. She had prepared, she had killed methodically, and she had not stopped until every bed in the house was silent. In a moment that gripped the courtroom, the prosecutor read directly from Melissa's journal. "They carry what should never exist. My blood, his, I love them, but they are wrong, and I must make it right. It took the jury only 2 days to reach a verdict, guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder. When the judge handed down her sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, Melissa didn't flinch. She showed no emotion, no remorse. Her face remained an unreadable mask, just as it had the day police found her sitting calmly beside her dead husband. The Holloway home was put up for sale, but no one would buy it. It remained abandoned, windows boarded, doors locked. Grass grew high in the front yard, and wind whistled through the broken panes. Locals whispered that no matter how many times the walls were painted or the floors replaced, the house would never be clean again. People still talk about the Holloway case. Podcasts, documentaries, books. Some blame the foster system. Others blame mental illness or the sealed records that kept critical truths hidden. But no theory ever makes the horror easier to understand, because in the end, it wasn't a stranger or an intruder who destroyed the family. It was the person they trusted the most. The one who tucked them in. The one who kissed their foreheads goodnight. The one who called herself their mother.